Why won't you just pull up?
Someday I want to do a one-handed pull-up. Well guys, as a matter of fact, I was not lying when I mentioned that. In fact, those 10 words alone are the exact reason I am making this video. So before we actually get to the pull-up part of this video, I figure you guys should know that as much as I seem to dislike lifting and working out, I have enjoyed pull-ups specifically for several years now, and considering that I've basically had a dream to do a one-arm pull-up since early 2023, I figured at the start of this year that it would be worth it to record my progress for a YouTube video. However, I will admit to you guys that at the time, I didn't really have much done in terms of planning for this video, so I will admit that there will likely be some variance in camera angles throughout this montage, but nevertheless, I hope you guys enjoy. So for the start of the journey, I officially committed to the one-arm pull-up challenge on January 13th of this year. But before I could get started, I figured I should have at least some knowledge of how to build up to it, which is why I spent a short time surfing the internet looking for some tutorials. And ultimately, I ended up using the step-by-step video posted by Fenex to create a short page of notes that would help me track my progress for this challenge, and at last, I was ready to hit the bar. The night of January 13th was the one that held my first training session for this challenge, and to say the least, it did not go so well. In all honesty, guys, I had completely overestimated how much strength I had actually acquired just by doing normal pull-ups prior to this challenge, which definitely made for a difficult first few days of it. As you can see, during that time, I worked mostly on the scapula shrugs and the pull-up negatives, and unfortunately had such a hard time with them that by about January 17th, I ended up with possibly the worst pull-up blister I have ever gotten, and had to take off almost an entire week as a result. However, as I continued to work towards the end of January, I finally started to see a flicker of progress in the first couple steps of the challenge. Because after a bit of experimentation with the pull-up negatives, I figured out that for some weird reason, this technique of me crossing my legs on the way down actually helped me keep a better grip on the bar, which would actually turn out to be the technique I used for the entire rest of the challenge when doing the negatives. And on top of that, it was easy to see that practicing the negatives more and more was only continuing to increase my bicep strength for the scapula shrugs, as I was able to just squeeze in 10 with each arm on my final filming day in January. So with the first 3 to 4 steps of my notes already complete, I headed into February riding high, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before I hit another roadblock. Yep, that's right, guys. With the confidence I had stemming from my accomplishments by the end of January, I went into February with high motivation to take things to the extreme. Now, although I was able to get a few insane lifts, like in the case of my 10-second one-arm hang with my chin above the bar, I ended up overworking my right bicep not once, but twice within a week. First on February 3rd from what I believe was actually the 10-second hang, and then on February 7th after trying to get back into my routine prematurely. So similar to the aftermath of the blister from late January, I ended up taking off some more time as a result. But this time, I actually felt like I somewhat started to recognize the value of taking some time to rest during this challenge. Because up until this point in about mid-February, I felt like I had been filming day after day and lifting on and off camera with barely any time in between, and already with 3 overworkings in the span of only the first month of the challenge, it finally occurred to me that maybe the key to success was in fact more breaks. So, with this new plan in mind, I continued to work throughout February while simultaneously spreading out the days I filmed, and although I didn't see instantaneous results in terms of my lifting, I was able to record no further overworkings for the remainder of the challenge. And while this thought was briefly uplifting, I felt like I still needed to prioritize my reps for the challenge, as this was the time that I was starting to really struggle with the next step of the challenge, which at the time was the jumping one-arm pull-up. Now, although I didn't necessarily think that this step in particular would help me a whole lot in the long run, the degree of how bad I appeared to be at it really started to make me lose some confidence. Because aside from the fact that I can now admit that I think what was actually causing it was either my approach or some other variable dealing with the height of the pull-up bar, I figured that if I couldn't do this, then there was no way I would ever be able to do a one-arm pull-up. So at this point, I began hopefully looking for a quick fix to this, and luckily, by the start of March, I was able to fabricate a homemade, yet off-the-charts solution. Around March 1st, if I remember correctly, at about the halfway point of this challenge, I was experimenting with some dumbbell curls when I came up with a curling routine that would shape almost the entire rest of my filming. Now, although I didn't film the routine the very first time I tried it, I started with 20-pound dumbbells in each hand and went through a sequence that consisted of 30 reps with the right, 15 with the left, 25 with the right, 13 with the left, 20 with the right, 10 with the left, and so on until I got all the way down to 5 and 3 back to back, all without dropping the weights. And guys, I'm going to admit to you right now that it is actually so important not to miss that last point. Because believe it or not, by far the hardest part of this challenge was not dropping the weights the entire time, as that was actually a rule I made myself follow to build up as much endurance as possible in my arms. And also, another minor note to take into account about this routine is that it was actually designed to work my right arm harder than my left, because by this point in the challenge I had clearly begun to notice that my right arm was able to lift a lot more than my left, which also meant that I'd be more likely to learn the one-arm pull-up with my right arm first. So after a few filming days of getting used to the dumbbell routine, I had begun to notice that I actually was starting to feel a lot stronger at the pull-up bar, and as a result, briefly turned my attention to what I call strength tests, which are basically the equivalent of a normal one-arm pull-up attempt. And while these weren't my first official strength tests of the challenge, these were the first ones where I actually was able to see some signs of improvement, like on this attempt here where I was able to propel myself nearly 2/3 of the way to the bar while using my legs. However, since at that point I also felt like I was beginning to use my legs a lot more just to help me along in the process, I made the decision on the final day of March that I would allow myself to use legs for the remainder of the challenge. By now, we are at the home stretch. April was just starting, and as it turns out, my motivation to finish this video was also at its all-time high due to, first of all, semester finals and a packed golf schedule being right around the corner, and second of all, my upload schedule. At the time, Dice Stacking Trick Shots 3 had been out for around 2 weeks, and although the Funny Moments video hadn't quite come out yet, I knew it wouldn't be long before I'd have to get serious about finishing another full-length video. So for these two reasons, I began trying to lift almost every single day in at least one form or another, and even by April 12th had moved from the 20-pound dumbbells in my original curling routine to 25-pound dumbbells just to keep building my muscle. Now obviously, this decision was made quite hastily, but after doing the original routine for so long, I can honestly say that I felt like I handled the transition pretty well. And in fact, just a few days after making the switch, I was able to get such a close attempt on April 18th that for the following few days of the challenge, I only found it necessary to begin with a few scapula shrugs and then to dive right back into the attempts. And at last, on April 21st, after over 20 days of filming, 90 minutes of footage, and a myriad of mental struggles throughout the 3-month challenge, this happened.
There we go, guys. That's to the front There we go.
So in the end, I got the one-arm pull-up using my legs, which I will admit was probably a bit cheap, but sometimes in life, guys, the real lesson is actually what lies behind the scenes. Because the truth is, I may not be built for a one-arm pull-up like some people are. But for those of you who have made it to this point in the video, I hope you can see that with a little bit of stamina, anyone can do anything.
What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I am the wolf.